what I would like to mention is that most of you know that in 2018, Abiy Ahmed took office in Ethiopia, and he was granted a Nobel Peace Prize in 2019, especially by ending the stalemate with Eritrea on border issues, like this 20 years of more or less no war, no peace. And considering that Ethiopia, contrary to most other African countries, did not have a colonial past, but it has 110 million inhabitants, so it's really a country with a huge population. It is more than 80 ethnic groups, and some of them even also have multiple identities. Now, I would say everyone was hoping that with Abiy Ahmed, that democratic change would come quite quickly. And there were also some positive developments in the democratic processes. We hear about greater freedom of media, that exiled political parties were invited to come back, political prisoners were released, opposition is allowed, economic growth is happening slowly, but Ethiopia still is one of the poorest countries. One other remarkable thing I would like to mention before I hand over to Hannes is also that they have also a first female president right now, and that elections are also upcoming this year. And now what we are going to discuss today is especially about what is going on in the northern part of the country these days, the conflict in Tigray, in Welkait, and also what it means a little bit on the region. I look forward to a very interesting discussion and would already then hand over to Hannes SWOBODA. And to the participants, please be active and ask questions if you like. Hannes, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. There's not much to say from my side, not much to add. I think one of the questions, of course, always is it really reasonable to give a Nobel Prize to a person who just starts his position? We had a similar situation with President Obama, but of course, in this case, many people ask, of course, is that a big disappointment? Because there was so much hope put into Abiy Ahmed as the new president, as a new lightning rod figure for Africa as a whole. And on the other hand, of course, we know that it's a difficult internal situation. We have, as mentioned, so many different ethnic groups. And the question is, can a state which is still relying on these ethnic groups really be viable? And of course, in the Horn of Africa, we have a very, very, very difficult situation. Stephanie mentioned Eritrea, where there's some sort of a peace agreement. On the other hand, we have tension with Somalia, with Sudan, with Egypt, also because of the big dam project in Ethiopia on the River Nile. So it is a quite interesting and delicate situation we are. On the other hand, Addis Ababa, in the capital, is also the seat of the African Union, some sort of a, beginning of a European Union, of an African Union, similar to the European Union, because it's a beginning stage. So it is interesting to look into the situation in Ethiopia, and we are very, very grateful for SONJA that she is ready to speak to us. She will speak for, 20, 25 minutes, and then we'll put some questions to her, and then we open, of course, to the general attendees to put their questions. Please, Sonja, we're happy you are here, and please start with your introduction.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Addis Ababa is the seat of the African Union and also the center of African diplomacy on the continent. Ethiopia has always been a high hope on the continent, and the ethnic diversity in the country has been a strength. It is rather new that the ethnic groups have been in competition to each other, as it is the case since 1991. Previously, Ethiopians identified themselves as Ethiopian, as Habesha, and this ethnic diversity has been a strength. Now, since a few years, there's a rise in what they call political ethnic entrepreneurs who are using ethnicity as a method to divide the people, whereas Ethiopia has always been strong in unity. Ethiopia is an ancient country. In the past, it has been ancient civilization, indeed, with these aspects of civilization that European colonizers brought to the continent, they already had it in place. And since the different regimes changed throughout the country, we usually remember when the Emperor Haile Selassie left his office. It was during a famine, and the famines are one of these stereotypes that Europeans usually connect with Ethiopia. Also after the Derg regime, which was known for not allowing any kind of dissent. During the Derg regime, there was also a famine. During this time, the TPLF, the Tigrayan Liberation Front, started an armed guerrilla force and was fighting together with Eritrean government, the Ethiopian government, then a socialist movement, and also received support, international support. After the TPLF won over the Derg regime in union with Eritrean forces, the ethnic federalism was introduced by Haile Mariam Desalegn, who was in charge, who became a prime minister and was in charge until 2012 when he died. He also started the so-called democratic developmental state, under which the state has the control over the economy, which also means the group that controls the state has control over the economy, and there appeared opposition towards the TPLF-led regime that seemed to control not only the government, not only the economy and the military, but the whole country. The TPLF represented the Tigrayan group in the country, which are 6% of the total population. But they were controlling the whole country, and more opposition forces were opposing this. In 2005, where the first was an attempt for elections, the first democratic elections, and after these elections, in which the TPLF-led government lost a lot of its leadership, there was a crackdown and a criminalization of the opposition. A lot of people had to leave the country, and a TPLF stayed in control and appointed Haile Mariam Desalegn as prime minister after Meles Zenawi died. Haile Mariam Desalegn from the south tried to implement reforms. He wasn't able to do this because he also explained how the TPLF leadership still kept on controlling the whole country and controlling also his office, controlling the security, and he wasn't able to bring reforms to the country. The protests were becoming stronger during 2015 to 2018. A lot of people who are following the Horn of Africa may remember the Oromo protests. There were also protests in the Amhara region. The Oromo protests got more international recognition also. And the government reacted with criminalization, with outlawing protests, with a state of emergency from 2016 until well into 2017. The protests continued, and eventually Haile Mariam Desalegn had to resign. One of the last things he did was to release some of the more prominent political prisoners. And then Abiy Ahmed was announced as prime minister. He is part of the Oromo group. The Oromo group is the largest ethnic group. The second largest are the Amhara. And during the protests, there was also a lot of solidarity. They didn't have the same goals, but a lot of the problems they mentioned and the interests they were fighting for democratization, for land reforms, for self-determination were similar interests that they had. And when Abiy Ahmed was appointed as a Oromo, there was also a lot of hope in the country, especially among the Oromo people, that now it will be their turn. In contrast, that before the Amhara people were traditionally in government positions, and after the Tigrayan people were in the power, that now is their turn. So at that time also some ethnic pride was developed, and there was a young generation that grew up with this ethnic division that was institutionalized since 1991. But what Abiy Ahmed promised was to bring democracy for the whole country, to bring a unity, something he called Medemer, to bring a synergy that brings together the strong parts of the country. And also within the long ancient history of Ethiopia, in which usually a transfer of government always involved someone dying, someone having to go into exile, it was the first time that there was an attempt at reparative justice, that also the victims of the previous regimes could be heard, that there would be rule of law. So I could go into the Medemer process unless you have a question right now.
Oh, please, please.
So what does Medemer mean? Abiy Ahmed published a book about Medemer. He also mentioned what he means with Medemer in his inauguration speech, and also when he was accepting the Nobel Peace Prize in 2019. And with Medemer, he means a synergy that is greater than just the addition of the parts, that by working together, by working in cooperation, by relying on brotherhood, the synergy, the sum can be actually greater than just the single parts. And he wants to keep the positive that the country already has. He also said we don't have to let go of ethnic federalism, but we have to let go of the hate. There are also ideas about maybe restructuring the country regionally. But what he also acknowledged is that in the past, the regime, the government didn't act to its own laws, that there has been torture, that people have been incarcerated, that there have been mass displacements, people have lost their lives, and people have lost their property, and he promised this will never ever happen again. What he promised was a rule of law, and this is a quote: "The government needs to respect the law." That's what he said in his inauguration speech, that what he promised, that in the future the government will follow the laws and not rule by law, but rule according to the law, that the law will be respected. And he's saying that because this hasn't been the case in the previous year since 1991. With this, he also hopes that the ethnic conflicts will come to an end and that people will come together. What he wants to create is a unique democracy that is tailored to the Ethiopian context, which is rooted in Ethiopian culture and consciousness and thinking, and that mirrors and addresses and includes all aspects of Ethiopian society, traditions, and lived experiences. That is what he promised, and that is that it was indeed at this time a hopeful promise for the country. With this, I would like to introduce you to one conflict that has been happening during 2019, 2018 in the open, but which also goes back to the beginning of the TPLF regime, and that's that pertains to the place Welkait in the northern region. So I will show you a few slides. This is a map of Ethiopia and of the Tigray region, especially with the regions. You see that a lot of the regions are according to ethnic groups, which created a lot of conflict.
We do not yet see it. You need to share the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it works right now.
You see a map of Ethiopia with the regional borders, and also enlarged the area of Tigray. The areas were added to the Tigray region after the TPLF won over the Ethiopian government in the civil war, which lasted from 1975 to 1991. And since then, people who were ethnically Amhara also protested against being displaced from their region. There were also grave violations of human rights that have been happening. And Amhara people within the Amhara Council have also reported this, but they weren't heard. This is called as one of the most suppressed ethnic conflicts in modern history. In 2015, there was a new movement of Amhara people who have been displaced. They call themselves Welkait Committee, Welkait Together Committee. And they were organizing basic democratically by collecting signatures, by having open meetings, by inviting everybody to come to their meetings and listening to their concerns, and providing evidence of grave injustices in the region, that the areas that have been added to Tigray, that the indigenous Amhara population would not be allowed to speak their language, to practice their traditions. They weren't able even to listen to their music. They weren't able to even support a football club in Gonda. If they would wear the shirt, they could be. There were incidents where young men were taken to prison just for supporting a football club that is not from the region. This is just minor, but there are also mass graves. And a few scholars have attended to it who are not based in Ethiopia, because in Ethiopia you couldn't mention this. What surprised me was that they democratically and peacefully organized for the questions, but we're faced with a lot of pressure from the government. So first they were given a runaround when they had a petition saying this is what happened in the past. We are asking about our identity. Why can we not be within our Amhara identity as our fathers and forefathers and mothers? And why are our people that we represent tortured and displaced, and there are no concerns. They had a petition and they were sent from office to office and within the region, from the parliament to the regional government to the Western administration to the House of Federations in Addis Ababa. According to the laws, there could have been an answer, especially with the House of Federations, that would have the final say-so in these kind of questions, but there was not a political will. These kind of land questions, there are several within the country. What is special about this one, that it is directly in Tigray, and it is a direct challenge to the power of TPLF, and a challenge to the narrative that TPLF has the power over the whole country because they freed the whole country from the Amhara, which they equalized as being socialist Derg regime. So they were first given a runaround and then they were incarcerated. Most of the whole committee was incarcerated. Most of them, all of them were arrested by a Tigrayan military from the region Tigray within Amhara region. So they were based in Gonda. and they were arrested from Tigrayan military forces that came from Tigray to Amhara region to arrest them. Most of them were taken directly, except for one person. They were all taken directly to Addis Ababa, to Magalawi prison, which is known as a torture chamber. And they were kept for 18 months until Abiy Ahmed came into power. This person on the right is Colonel Demek Ezaudu. At the time he was the chair of the Welkait committee. At this time, he wasn't in the military anymore, but during his campaigning, people knew him because he was in the military and he also fought for Ethiopia. And they used this picture. It's also part of maybe the patriarchal heroism to have men in uniform as leaders. But when they approached, when they went to the officers to ask the question, they didn't go armed. They only went armed with the constitution and with their petition. When he was arrested, he defended himself, and also the neighborhood defended him. A lot of people are armed in Ethiopia, and he was then celebrated for not giving in, for keeping on with this demand for democratization and for justice. That was what he was saying in 2015, 16, 17, and still today. So people had the photo on the left top is 9 days later after the arrests of the committee. There were public protests within the country. You can also see on one of the signs the solidarity with the Oromo people. There were public protests. One of them was violent, and after that the religious leaders from the Muslim community and from the Orthodox Christian community asked the public to be peaceful. So there were peaceful demonstrations that kept ongoing, which were cracked down by the government. There were arbitrary arrests. The Ethiopian Human Rights Council also wrote about this. People were keeping on pressing for the release of political protesters, and had then general strikes when protests were forbidden. They had general strikes, ADMA, in which the stores kept closed, the traffic kept closed, and that was something that was bottom up. It wasn't something that was ordered top down, but within the population, people decided, and these demands for the freedom of political prisoners also broadened into calls for democratizations and justice in the country. People showed also their support by having the photo of Colonel Demek Ezaudu on their houses, in public restaurants, on the back of buses of public transport. He became an iconic figure who is known throughout the country and especially in the northern regions. There's also a photo of Alene Shafu, Colonel Demek Ezaudu, and Atalay Zafe, to whom I spoke several times from 2016 until last year, 2020. 1 year ago, I was with them again to catch up on what's going on. And this is in their civil clothes is how they went to ask to petition for their interests, not in military clothes. That's something that I wanted to make clear. So while they were arrested for asking constitutional questions, for asking peacefully, for their rights to be respected, this is a list of articles of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Ethiopia that state institutions and state governments actually violated within the process of this. I will not go through all of them, just to give you an idea. So there's this contrast between bottom-up civil civil rights organizers petitioning for democracy and how the state reacted in 2016. This also led to the change of the prime minister. Colonel Demek Zaudu was released while Haile Mariam Desalegn was still prime minister. The others were released when Abiy Ahmed took office, and Abiy Ahmed took office in April 2018, and within the same month he went to Gondar and spoke to the Welkait committee for the first time. This also marks one of the days when the relationship between the TPLF and the prime minister became harder. And this is something that he also directly mentions in his address to the prime minister. We have shared the link to his speech, which was 3 hours, when he explained why the federal government engaged in the Tigray region with the conflict that is ongoing right now. After the TPLF in the region attacked the military forces, Abiy Ahmed sent the military to defend the country, to defend the forces. But that was the end result of a conflict between Abiy Ahmed and the TPLF that had already started. So when Haile Mariam Desalegn resigned, we thought we saw a peaceful exchange of power, but actually the transfer of power is what we're seeing now in 2020, 2021. This is where TPLF is being disarmed, basically. In 2018, there were mass protests of appreciation of Abiy Ahmed in almost all of the regions. So the photos that you see here is a celebration of Abiy Ahmed and his promise for democratization. But what you also saw that at the bottom right corner, there was also a celebration of Colonel Demek Zaudu. And during my interviews, I heard several times when people said actually the democratization in Ethiopia was brought forward by Colonel Demek Zaudu, who kept on insisting on democratic processes. What happened in the meantime between April 2018 and November 2020, a lot of people died. There were a lot of ethnic conflicts that was also mentioned during the celebration of the Nobel Peace Prize in 2019, that there are a lot of ethnic motivated massacres happening in the country. Why these massacres are happening is a long story. We cannot bring all of this. Of course, it has to do with land. It has to do with identity. It also has to do with the ethnic federalism that was introduced and to create ethnic lines, to create hate along ethnic lines. Something that I found interesting interviewing the Welkait members who are representing people who were displaced for being of a certain ethnic group is that they always made the distinction between Tigrayan people and the Tigrayan government. They always said the TPLF government is doing this and this, the TPLF leadership is doing this and this, but they never mentioned that the Tigrayan people are doing something. So that is the problem, the main problem that Ethiopia has right now, and it's a problem Abiy Ahmed had to face, something where a lot of people were losing hope and he was losing support, is because these massacres have been happening in a lot of regions in Ethiopia. A lot of ethnic groups have been targeted for their ethnicity, but so far no Tigrayans have been targeted, and we hope that also with the situation right now in Tigray, where we will hear more reports that ethnic violence will not be happening there. It's something that the leaders who are in charge now are not promoting for. with these, so these are all names for certain areas, for Metekel, for Maigadra, for Sheshemene, for Arsi, Wole. People were disappointed that the federal government didn't interact. So Abiy Ahmed, with his Medemer approach to brotherhood, and he asked people to be patient and to wait. But some political ethnic entrepreneurs used the opportunity to create hate and to create these massacres. And the TPLF was also accused of financing and promoting ethnic violence, because this is how they kept their power, by creating ethnic division. I interviewed Colonel Demek in 2019. I was there again in 2020. At this time, they were all also losing hope in the promise that Abiy Ahmed has made when he first met them, that yes, we will answer the question according to the constitution and in a democratic way with our institutions. It didn't happen. After they met with him for the first time, they gave him a runaround. A border and identity question commission was established in Addis Ababa. They were sent there. It didn't work. At this time, already in 2019, the Welkait committee noticed that people were still being displaced, that it actually got worse. The committee itself was able to work, and they have an office, but people in the area were still being murdered for their ethnicity. It didn't change until early November this year, when the TPLF attacked the Ethiopian federal forces. And in reaction to this, to defend the country, the federal government went towards Tigray. And the first parts that were secured were the Western Tigray, where also Welkait is located. 1 month later, on December 4th, Colonel Demek Ezaudu became the administrator for peace and security in the Western region. And there will be a process to restructure also the area. From this area, also a lot of people left towards Sudan. There were some fighters who were insurgency group, military groups from the TPLF. There were also people who lived in the area. So far, from as well as Abiy Ahmed, also Colonel Demek Ezaudu, are asking the people to be quiet and to follow the democratic process. So, I wanted to share this with you, which may give you a different perspective on the situation at hand now. Something maybe to add is that that it at least gives hope that now there is no state-sanctioned violence in the country, that it's not ordered from the top down to engage in violence, and that there are people in charge at the federal level and also at the regional level who are pressing for democracy and for unity. Thank you.
Maybe I have a question to follow up. Since the African Union, the United Nations, and the European Union, also many international organizations, also individual countries appeal to Ethiopia not to escalate the tensions there in Tigray, so not to enter there with military force. So why would you say did diplomacy in the end fail? Since also what you were presenting before, this Medemer approach, which is this unity of the country, even though it's very diverse, but still it's this multinational federalism. So it should be federal, but also in a multinational way. So why would you say was the diplomatic door closed?
Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is a believer in diplomacy and talk, and that's also how he brought Eritrea to the table. They had coffee together, and since then the situation between Ethiopia and Eritrea is better, and he also brought Eritrea into the discussion with other countries in the Horn of Africa, which wasn't possible before. From what I've noticed, Abiy Ahmed has extended his hands to TPLF leaders, trying to reform the country, but also holding people accountable. I invite everybody to read his address to the parliament, or his answers to the parliaments, which we have posted in the chat, where he explains how he took office, how he was hindered from his to implement his reconciliation process, that he was being simple things. He didn't have a key to his office. He was locked in his house. The security took him to his house and they locked him in his house. There are a lot of small incidents like this that you can read there. The door to diplomacy was shut by TPLF leaders. That's what I get from following all the discussions, and also with following what has been happening in the past years within Ethiopia. People were asking for peace, for justice, for reconciliation, but you cannot just order reconciliation from the top down without holding anyone accountable. So the TPLF was controlling almost all of the political positions, diplomacy positions. They controlled the contacts to the media, to the international media, which still plays out today. And when some of their members were charged, for example, with torture at Makalawi prison and for genocide in certain areas, they went to the Tigray region and they weren't touched. There's a Supreme Court judge, and she asked the region to please, here are arrest warrants to turn over these individuals, and they were not turned over. And in the meantime, people were still suffering. The TPLF also controlled in the economy, almost all of the sectors in the economy. They were largely benefiting from international cooperations, from which the people concerned oftentimes didn't benefit. Abiy Ahmed tried different approaches, also in terms of control, TPLF controlling the markets. They were receiving all the financial support. There were charges of high corruption and of stealing from the country. So Abiy Ahmed noticed that within the balance sheets there were billions missing, and he asked the people to return the money, which they didn't return. On social media, there were some when they found houses in which you would see stacks of cash being kept. So something that he did without using force was to change the currency. That was one move to because TPLF wouldn't hand over the black marketed money that was there. He changed the currency so that the old currency became useless, and he used also the financial sector in order to try to stop fueling TPLF power. But in terms of diplomacy, it doesn't seem that it was him who closed the door. He tried on various levels to talk to TPLF leadership. There is the tradition of Shimglena within the country, of talking through elders, of sending mediators. And several times Abiy Ahmed sent mediators. He sent national role models who were rejected. Some of them were also humiliated during this time. He sent the Mothers for Peace, a traditional organization that usually creates at least some mediating and try to get people on the table. They refused to listen to them. They refused to listen to religious leaders that were sent through Abiy Ahmed or through the federal government. And it was TPLF that didn't cooperate.
Thank you very much. If I may, Stephanie, take the second point. I think it was very interesting what your talk and your 2 points. One was on Tigray and TPLF, and the other one was on the general ethnic structure. And there were several questions also in the question and answers and in the chat about how can it function when you have these many ethnic groups which insisting, of course, on their rights, and you have that kind of federal structures not on different regions as such, but on the ethnic element. One of our listeners and viewers asked very bluntly, how can democracy function in such a state? I wouldn't go so far, but maybe you mentioned also that Abiy Ahmed were tolerating more or less ethnic motivated massacres. Should it done it differently? So I think Tigray is, of course, a very specific element, but the general question also is how could it function? Could the development go on in such a fragile, ethnic, diverse country? And just a last remark, you mentioned at the beginning, okay, it was never a problem, but you have, of course, to see, you had the overriding Haile Selassie, you had enemies from the outside, like Italy. And you had dictatorship. This put the people perhaps together and didn't give room to such ethnic divisions. Now, as there is more democracy, there is also room for ethnic divisions and conflicts. So how do you see the general situation?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So in the past, during you mentioned Haile Selassie, you also mentioned that Derg in the past, the ethnic composition didn't really play a role. The political division was along other lines, but not along ethnic lines. So that is something that was introduced in 1991. The younger generation is used to it. The younger generation started to identify along ethnic lines, although you also should not forget that in Ethiopia there is a lot of intermarriage. There are also a lot of people who do not identify by a certain ethnic group. There are also a lot of people who say, I'm from Addis Ababa, but they grew up as Ethiopian. So this is rather a new phenomenon. And Abiy Ahmed is trying to get over it. And he has a lot of support by the general public in not using ethnicity anymore as a division. So ethnic federalism has been very difficult because then when you have a federal structure in which the budget is allocated to federal states, which then are aligned to certain ethnic identity, then all of the political questions become identity questions. And this way, politics is, identity is politicized, and you create problems where you cannot discuss about certain political reforms, political ideas, different ideas, when everything is about identity. And people are being discredited for being from a certain ethnic background, because then you disqualify yourself from being legitimately asking for certain rights and not including everybody. So what Abiy Ahmed is trying to do is to create this kind of brotherhood that existed in the country before, to work together and not use the identity question anymore. There are ideas about restructuring the federal component. There is no consensus there yet. There were ideas about structuring it north, south, east, west, etc., but not according to the ethnic lines. Also, the elections are coming up, and there are, in the meantime, political parties that align themselves according to a certain ethnicity. Before there was no, according to ethnic lines, but there are also parties who are organizing themselves along certain ideas, for example, for justice or for prosperity or for democracy. So that is really a hope that this can work in the future.
Thank you.
I would also like to take up another question, since I would say we already should go into the Q&A section as well. And one question is a little bit more about the regional role. I mean, Ethiopia is a regional player, but the question is that how do you see the role of Eritrea in this conflict? And the question more specifically also asks if you think that there has been an arrangement between Abiy Ahmed and President Isaias on the operation in Tigray. What would you say?
It seems that Abiy Ahmed and the president of Eritrea are getting along well. They have been in contact since Abiy Ahmed took power. He was very quick to resolve the border issue between Ethiopia and Eritrea. There was a small piece of land around the little town of Medemer, which is a very small area, but both sides were very hard. This was still under Meles Zenawi, that more than 100 or around 100,000 people died just within this border conflict, and of course it ate up a lot of resources. Abiy Ahmed extended his hands, and Isaias Afwerki accepted it. And since then, they have been meeting several times. One thing people noticed, that when the border issue when peace was declared, that the people concerned in the area were not consulted. This was also a top-down approach. And since then, there have been a lot of meetings, which are not very transparent, so we don't know what has happened. But it seems that Abiy Ahmed has used his office also to work on diplomatic relations in the area, and that this move was also well prepared because he received support from Eritrea while the fighting was going on between the federal government and the TPLF. TPLF groups were shooting rockets at the infrastructure in Gondar and Bahada, but also towards Eritrea, and Eritrea didn't respond. So that was a sign that they are not going to intervene, that they're not going to support one side or even defend themselves, and that was a sign that they are that there is an agreement with the federal government of Ethiopia. Also, the other countries in the region, Somalia, Somaliland, Sudan and South Sudan, they were also helping. They were closing the border. They are watching also with the refugees that are coming. Who are they? Are these fighters or are these people? So there must have been a diplomacy in which way the Eritrean government is really in Ethiopia. I cannot say. Some people say, oh, there is some drone footage. I haven't seen it, or satellite images. I haven't seen them. I know there's a lot of exaggerated reporting on what's going on in the area, and we will know more in the next weeks. The humanitarian groups are having more access. Also, what they are reporting does not luckily echo the accusations that have been in the press before. So we will see in the future what the real picture is.
Thank you. Thank you very much for clarifying. I have another question, which is also deals a little bit with the humanitarian situation. You tackled a little bit. You were talking about refugees, and I mean there are many refugees from Tigray going to Sudan, but there are also many refugees from Eritrea within the Tigray region. Not to speak even about the internally displaced people within the region themselves. But the question goes to the humanitarian workers. One participant asked, like, why there are still a lot of problems for humanitarian workers to reach those in need in Tigray. What do you think? What is hindering them to get in contact with the region?
Mm-hmm. Well, one is that Abiy Ahmed and the federal government like to be in control of what is happening in their country. And they said, well, we are in the region and we are helping them, so the help should go through us, and people should not, humanitarian aid should not go into the region without us allowing it, especially since when there's a military operation still going on. In the meantime, humanitarian aid has entered the region. It may also be part of the history of the conflict in Ethiopia. If you remember, well, a lot of people remember when they hear about Ethiopia, they remember the starving children of the 1980s. That was in a time when the TPLF was a guerrilla operation, an armed group that was very persistent, and also during an area where people were dying in the region, where there was a food shortage, they were still continuing to fight. And humanitarian organizations helped. They brought aid to the region, and within the humanitarian aid, also discussions about among peace scholars, there was also the question, is this helping peace or is this helping to prolong the war? So in Ethiopia, there was also the impression that the foreign aid also helped the TPLF to survive the guerrilla and to win over the Derg region in the 1980s and 1991. So there's this old narrative that human aid groups also have helped TPLF to win their fight in the past. Then people also know that the TPLF is very well connected within the economy, within diplomacy, with international media. They're dominating still today the international media. They're dominating how this conflict is being portrayed in the world. And they're also well connected with the human aid, because everything that is beneficial, the TPLF had its hand on it and its eyes on it. So what the Abiy Ahmed's military operation is trying to do is bring those to justice. So they have a list of people they are looking for, and they want to find them alive or dead and alive if they are resisting. So several TPLF leaders have also been killed during this operation. But what Abiy Ahmed is trying to do is to find these people. They're not trying to fight Tigrayan people. They're trying to end the conflict so that there can be prosperity for everybody. That's the narrative. But they are also trying to hinder outside forces to assist TPLF leaders who are searched by arrest warrants to leave the country. That's probably one of the main reasons why the government was hesitant to let aid groups uncontrolled into the country and be in the Tigray region.
Thank you very much. There will be another question, and it's a quite blunt question. Somebody asks, do you believe that Mr. Abiy is still in control of what is going on in Tigray? And I would also add to the question, like, if you could also add a little bit about the role of civil society. Does civil society play a role in Ethiopia, also when it comes to the northern part? And if yes, what would that be?
Yes, thank you for the questions. There's still fighting going on in the northern region, so who's totally in control, it's not clear yet, although the civil administration is working. The city administrations are working. The power is on the bureaucracy is working. So Abiy Ahmed, or the government in general, seems to be in control and working. They know what's going on. There are certain areas where Tigrayan TPLF fighters are still fighting. So these areas are not controlled yet. But there's also Ethiopia is not known for transparency until things are settled. So there are some areas where we are not sure yet. In terms of civil society, of course, because of the past, because of the grave violations of human rights that have happened in the past during various regimes, there is the fear that people will suffer. And something that is different now is that it's not state sanctioned. That the leadership is saying we are all Ethiopians. Tigrayan people are not part of TPLF, and that also from the top down there's the understanding. All the people are Tigrayan people. All are invited to be part of the country, and that it's only certain TPLF leadership that they are searching. When it comes to civil society, something that is interesting is that you usually can see in how far the population is concerned by the popular protests or popular display. So right now, during what you have seen in the photos about the Welkait conflict, or also what has happened in Oromia region during 2015-16, was that there were public protests. People were in the streets. During this campaign, this military operation, there were photos and videos of people feeding the soldiers while they were marching in the streets. It is not sure if this is propaganda, but there have been so many that it rather seemed that in certain areas the population, the civil society, was in favor of Abiy Ahmed taking control and finally acting and changing this stallment. In Tigray region, currently you don't see this public support for the TPLF. What you see in the country is there are in several areas a public display of support for Abiy Ahmed, but you don't see a public display within the country for TPLF. Some may be afraid, but there's in social media you see a strong support for TPLF, and the Tigrayan diaspora is also very explicit, and they are very strong in the social media. But in the country itself, there is no strong support of public support shown for the TPLF leadership.
Just add a quick question. You spoke about the strong influence of TPLF on the media, and especially those in the Western media. How is the situation in Africa? Do you know how, of course, Africa is a big continent with many, many countries. Has the image of Abiy Ahmed suffered amidst his African colleagues or in the neighboring countries? How is it? Can you have an impression about the image of Abiy Ahmed and the feeling of the people, if it's a justified intervention or not?
Mm-hmm. From the responses from African leaders, it seems that they support Abiy Ahmed's actions. From the direct neighbors, they are supporting him directly or indirectly. In Sudan, the Sudan military also arrested some of the TPLF members who were fleeing there with gold and large amounts of foreign currency cash, and turned them over to Ethiopian forces. So in the direct neighborhood, they are supporting Abiy Ahmed. Of course, there's diplomacy involved. There's no transparency, so we don't know yet what the other countries are gaining for supporting Abiy Ahmed. in general, it seems that a strong leadership is valued in a lot of African countries in the African context. And by engaging and gaining the control that was denied to him before, his image is rather getting stronger and his standing is getting stronger within the African community.
Thank you.
I also would like to address one more question to you, which deals a little bit with the role of the African Union. Patrick McGrath is asking if you can discuss a little bit what the historic or potential role of the African Union in conflict resolution in Ethiopia might be. Might it differ from the role of the United Nations? And then also international organizations have been mostly kept out of the current conflict in Tigray. So is there a better way they could engage with the country?
Sorry, you mean how the
African Union, if the African Union would have a potential, what could be the potential role of the African Union in the conflict, since most international organizations stayed out of the conflict so far? That's the question which was posed there.
If the African Union would criticize the government, it would have said something. So by keeping quiet, it is rather a sign that they are supporting what is happening within Ethiopia. If there was a need to intervene, they would have said something.
Okay. Probably also then in line that it's still a domestic conflict, as Abiy Ahmed also always is referring. It's a domestic conflict and not a conflict between Eritrea or other ones. So also in line with the sovereignty of Ethiopia and
Yeah, sovereignty is very strong impetus in the African politics, that there should be no interference in local matters. So since this is viewed as a conflict within the country of Ethiopia between the federal government and the government of the Tigray region, which was the country's federal government before, it's a domestic country and hence other African countries don't intervene, but they have rather expressed their support for the actions of the federal.
Thank you very much. Hannes, do you have an additional question?
No, I think it's very good what you said to us, and of course it's a bit different than the impression we get in many of the medias, and that is balancing perhaps a bit the situation, and maybe we can come back at a later stage also to the situation in the Horn of Africa in general. But for the moment, I have no further question. I think most of the questions also have been answered from the chat and from the question and answers forum. But up to you, Stephanie.
Yes, so I think if you would like to say, I don't know, like if you want to give like one last statement, you're free to do so. From my part, I would say thank you very much for all engagement, and it was also in the Q&A. It was very, very engaged participants with many comments, not so many questions, but many comments on the whole conflict. So you can see that there are different ideas, of course, but very much appreciate that we have been able to discuss what is going on, even though with what you said, that there is a lack of transparency in all this. So when it comes to what Eritrea is really doing, we hear yesterday, I was reading in BBC that the US administration also said that Eritrea has to be out of the country, that they have some proofs that there are in there. So Abiy Ahmed says it's not the case. So it's really difficult when you're not on the ground to see like what is a valid information and what is not. That also depends on, as you were mentioning several times, the lack of democracy. I think it was also very important that you said that the Tigray people are different from the Tigray government. So this is also something which everyone should take into account, and that the Medemer approach in general does add to the whole idea of the country. How successful it will be, I mean, I would say we will see how successful Abiy Ahmed will be if he is able to continue his approach, if he has the support from within the country, but of course also the region there. I mean, there is also conflict with Egypt here over some other projects when it comes then to a dam, and the situation in the Horn of Africa is and was fragile. So from my side, I would say thank you very much for your participation and for your willingness to discuss with us. And I will hope that we can keep looking at the what is going on in the region. That way, maybe we can have a follow-up in several months from now. And thank you very much also to all the participants. And yeah, Ms. Jon, if you still want to say one last sentence, please feel free.
Just two last sentences. So first of all, what I explained here is gained over several years of having lived and worked in Ethiopia, which was a pleasure and an honor for me. And I had the opportunity to not be in Addis Ababa, but more in the northern region among people. And I want also to express my thankfulness for a lot of people who have shared the information, also members of the Welkait committee who took a lot of time to speak to me over and over again over the years. And I want to thank the IIP for inviting me and giving me the chance to share some of my insights and my research. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yeah, enjoy your evening. And as we say, stay healthy and hope to see you soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.